For the last 6 years, I've been standing up for the Palestinian people in their torment. I started doing that because I was outraged by the bombing of some of the poorest people on this earth in Afghanistan by B-52s from 32,000 feet. That was what galvanized me. And you say, why would I then look at Palestine? Well, Palestine is the hinge of our humanity. It is at the hinge of our humanity.
Right. My son will criticize the title. He always says I use long words and doesn't understand them. So I always say, look them up. That's the title. Can you see it? Good. I'm going to read from a text. I won't apologize. It allows me to put the text on my website. If you Google the website of David Halpin, you will see a lot that I've written, and other people. And I also find it difficult to remember all the details if I was to speak freely, which I like doing normally. So here we go. I stand here because I have strong passions and beliefs. You can guess that, perhaps. My central motivation is the child. When I look into the happy blue eyes of our 3 girl grandchildren, I see the 2 billion children in our world. Each child is precious, and not one should be hurt in the least way. I believe in the sanctity of life. As a surgeon, I heal and do not harm. I grew up in a family where to lie was sinful, and the underdog was not to be kicked around, perhaps an Irish influence there. Gentleness and sensitivity grew strong within me. I was the eldest of 4, and my sister, next down, has joined us this morning, I'm very pleased to say. Many share my instincts, but most of those in power do not. All living creatures and our most wonderful and beautiful world are threatened by humans who climb to power and who harm every single thing their claws can gouge, like Rumsfeld's claws. The weapons become more devilish and numerous, and the people in control more unpredictable, whilst the populations become inured to war by the video flashes of humans seen as bloodied rags. Citizens in the illusory democracies of the West see wars burning in a dozen places and feel they have no power to quench them. Instead, they sense the sparking of an Armageddon, of the vortex sucking ever louder, unstoppable, of a greater hell being brought to earth than hell's already burning, and by Jove, they're burning. How can we spoil this vortex and leave the innocent unharmed? I'm going to examine key factors. First, the nature of politicians and other leaders we deserve. I've underlined that. We deserve our leaders. Second, God. Third, the people on whom these leaders depend for power. Fourth, the media. Fifth, the strategies that drive the burning and the maiming. And sixth, and in humility, the possible remedies as I perceive them. I will leave one politician to last. He embodies all the flaws, cunning, charm, lethality of the psychopathic personality I will now describe after I have set the scene briefly. 147 people killed in Farah province about 4 weeks ago by bombs and missiles, American writing on them, fired from A-10 bombers called in by brave US Special Forces. Over 60 were children. Gone. About 20 seconds on the national news. For months, families have been blown apart by missiles fired from unarmed aerial vehicles and triggered by their operators in an Arizona base. No blood, no smell of viscera, just a burst of infrared on the plasma screen at the terrorist base in Arizona. The British leave Basra for the 3rd time. getting dry. I can't put it up here. Should be a drip coming in here, other side. The British leave Basra for the third time in 80 years, with the execrable Hutton, and I mean that, present for the striking of the Union flag. No one knows the British bombed its general and paediatric hospitals in 1991. Did you know that? The glorious RAF bombed 2 hospitals in Basra in 1991. It'll be on their regimental silver before long, perhaps. They left a broken public water system and blocked canals as the USA took over this gateway to the southern oil fields of Iraq. In Gaza, where I'm most interested, the Zionist entity puts all the weight of its heel on the bloodline and ventilation tube to the desperate Palestinian body. The draconian siege, which started in March 2006 when I was there, has been progressively tightened in order to stimulate a civil war. With this tactic failing, they planned the Greater Shoah, promised by Matan Vilnay, the Deputy Defense Minister of the Zionist entity, in February 2008, just as they were agreeing a truce with Hamas in midsummer in order to stop the homemade rockets, the Qassam rockets. Massive quantities of high explosive, thermobaric missiles, artillery shells, conventional and penetrating bombs, some sheathed with so-called depleted uranium, we think, cannon and small arms fire were rained down upon these long-suffering and resilient people. Army rabbis relished this Shoah, this Holocaust, which killed over 200 in the first 15 minutes of the assault, mostly new police graduates and children leaving the first shift of school. 90% of the Israeli Jewish population, when polled, were reported to be in favor of these added nails in the crucifixion of the Palestinian. Relatives of Holocaust victims could have been amongst those waving the blue star of David in celebration. I will tell a story as a witness to the murderous nature of this force at the end, about the attempted drowning by the entity of 16 world citizens, including myself, but I'm separating it from this talk for moral reasons. The useless Ban Ki-moon, appointee of the rogue republic, and no doubt of Israel too, moves from scene to burnt and bloody scene, hands wringing. More tents for more misery. 2 million refugees in the first winter of the war on the mythical Osama bin Laden. 4 million refugees out of the supreme war crime of the Judaeo-Christian assault on a defenseless Iraq. 2 million now in the Swat Valley. 70,000 in Sri Lanka, in media silence except for the UAV pictures which showed tents burning in the Tamil concentration. Death and desolation dealt out across Africa and Eurasia, with no sobbing of the phosphorus-blinded child, but still and fleeting images of very ordinary death. The vortex sucks ever louder. How can its spiraling be stilled? No worry, the Chelsea Flower Show went well, and Wimbledon awaits, and that's the dilemma in this country. It's the ordinariness, the church and the graveyard and the beauty of our country, the beauty of my woods, where I live on Dartmoor. But I'm always thinking of what it's like in Gaza or Basra or wherever. Right, so first of all, the leaders. Political. Not all those who seek political position are necessarily malevolent, but many are at least self-seeking. When did I start? 22? Good luck. But many are at least self-seeking. I think we'd agree on that. Anyone listening to the apologies being squeezed out of our MPs now can see that limited insight, brass neck, and absent principles are features of that club. Put them within the Pugin bubble, with access to 12 bars and subsidized drink for dulling of the brain, and one can see how men and women who might not be riveted with principle are instead needed further into plasticine. They are probably picked out before they come before the selection committees. Craig Murray, Her Majesty's former ambassador to Uzbekistan. Who knows Craig Murray? Hands up. No hands up. A few hands up. I can't see you, actually. Says this about the process. He is one of the most shrewd, knowledgeable, and courageous analysts writing in the UK today. He has the occasional blip, but he's a remarkable man. If you watched him before the Human Rights Committee, all shuffling their papers, trying to dissociate Britain from torture, you would see a man who had all his facts and who shone above these creatures confronting him. UK politics operates in getting tapped, this is what he says, and selected before any selection. The notional candidate is assessed on his, her probable and future course of conduct. Furthermore, for the running of many simulations of differing scenarios with many differing groups of stakeholders, these agree a nomination on one principle. Is the potential candidate a moron, i.e. no original opinions, and fearful of thinking for himself, and someone who is devoid of any honour, principle, sense of justice, bravery, and above all, honesty? Only then is a candidacy granted. And after a sham process that is passed as elections, the individual is let through the trough of, left near the trough of power to harumph as required and to whine about the real world problems that expect constituents who verily believe they have representation. Therefore, the almost exact replicas replace other replicas by the cookie-cutter politician production line, who are forever in the parliament. And I agree with him. There's a more specific mechanism above Etonian tie or being a law lecturer. That's a common preoccupation. We know many MPs are friends of Israel. Indeed, it is said that 80% of the Tory party in Westminster are of this stripe, or rather star. A large majority of Labour ministers are Labour friends of Israel. It appears to be a qualification for high office. This dual allegiance, this treason, does not happen at a fresher's table when a new parliament opens. It is quietly determined pre-selection. If, like me, you speak for the underdog of Palestine, it would be, don't phone us, we'll phone you. Amongst this ragbag, one-third lawyers and mostly career politicians are a good few I would categorize as psychopaths. My simple definition, interesting this, whenever I mention psychopaths to doctors, even psychiatrists, they always look blank. Yeah, very interesting, yeah? That is interesting, isn't it? So he needs an orthopedic surgeon to say it more bluntly, perhaps. But I've said this for a very long time. My simple definition is one who has an abnormal response, I think I remember hearing someone saying this, a normal response to the loss or suffering in others, and I will demonstrate this throughout this talk. A US psychologist, Robert Hare, PhD, has studied the psychopath. This is any reference I can get, in fact, on Information Clearinghouse as one example. These are some of the features which he lists and which resonate with me. There are others he lists. Glibness, superficial charm, pathological lying, cunning, manipulative, lack of remorse or guilt, callous, lack of empathy, impulsivity, irresponsibility, failure to accept responsibility for their own actions. Of these features, I emphasize glibness and superficial charm and pathological lying. When they hear a pack of lies, these flawed creatures, from a super-animated Blair, eyes flashing, the words clear and present danger spewing forth, they know they are to vote for a long-planned war. The psychopaths among them would feel nothing for the pain of others with an olive skin. Being Muslims, they are worth that much less. Let us look at those who climb the greasy pole right up to the top. You've seen this chap already. You're going to get rather bored with some of these people. Could the lights go down a little bit, possibly? Just so we can see him in all his glory. This man was raised by a zealous Zionist Presbyterian father. Is it Kirkcaldy or where he came from? I forget now. He was taken twice a year as a boy to see the glories of the Jewish state, or entity as best described. He sat in the sofa cabinet with his predecessor as the genocidal wars on Afghanistan and then on Iraq were unleashed. Like Blair and the others in that Downing Street lounge, he is a psychopath too. Not one of the successive pretexts for laying upon Iraq like wolves, Galloway, could justify the killing or maiming of even one family. Even if they believe the propaganda-driven Iraq body count of 100,000 and not the realistic measure of over 1 million murdered, they will not have suffered any pangs of regret. A greater purpose was being served. We would want to know why. I'm not quite sure what they're serving. His ability to lie matches his Granita pal. Here are some extracts from a speech he gave at Camp Bastion about a month ago. You notice how they all flick around from place to place. They're in Camp Bastion one day, next thing he's in Basra, and then they're in Washington, back in. Do you notice that, how it happens? I have questioned this. I suspect they're being kept, not just on simple stimulants like speed, amphetamines, but I suspect they're using a melanotropic hormone, which allows some of these the USAF people, to keep flying when their adrenal rhythm's upset. But there's something which keeps Blair smiling when he's been going for 24 hours in a jet. And I've actually wondered whether, if they are using that, whether it affects them here as well. It's the hormone produced by the pineal, which is very important actually in diurnal rhythm. That's an aside. I could make plenty of aside. You have to do this. You see, what is it? I couldn't do it, and I've got a lot of energy in me, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't fly to Washington and fly to the Middle East and still be speaking. Anyway, his speech. It's thanks to you, to the soldiers, that Afghanistan has a democracy now, where it never had it before. A third of the war, what do they call them? There's the warrior. A third of the parliament is packed with are those warlords. It's thanks to you that hospitals and health centres are now being built. This area on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is the crucible for global terror. This is why I'm quoting this. It's a breeding ground for global terrorists. There is a line of terror, a chain of terror that goes from Pakistan and the borders of Afghanistan right back to the streets of all our countries, I think it is important to recognize that if we do not take action here, and we do not fight back against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, then people in Britain and in other countries represented here are less safe and more insecure and more at risk as a result. The crucible of global terrorism, not Downing Street, nor the White House, nor Tel Aviv, but the poppy fields and earth houses of a poor and tribal people. General Sir Richard Dannett. Heard of him? There he is, all of his medals. He's obviously a paratrooper as well, I can see. Just notice his wings. Chief of the General Staff, British Army. Spoke to a Chatham House audience recently. I spent many hours preparing this talk, and it's nice to get the facts, hear what they had to say. The 17 pages on PDF are chilling. He spoke as an imperialist. War against non-state forces would continue for decades. Decades. Got the message? There was no mention of international law at all. He quoted academic warriors and, of course, Clausewitz, but not the Nuremberg principles. He couldn't quote those. The 1,000 dead, plus 1,000 plus dead and injured British troops were remembered, but not the uncounted Iraqi and Afghan dead and injured. Millions, about 3 million maimed in Iraq probably, on general ratios. These quotes are typical. And it must fall to us, there's always a good public school accent, just to give people the reassurance that they're very thoughtful, kindly people. It must fall to us at the top of defense, you see, not defense, it's attack. It's aggressive war they're talking about. To educate and to explain the utility of force as an instrument of national power. But succeed we must. Our national security, our credibility, our reputation, our strategic partnership with the US and the future of NATO are all bound up in Afghanistan. Lieutenant General Stanley McChrystal, who knows him? A few Americans in the audience. He is to head the US and NATO military command in Afghanistan. James Petras describes him as a psychopath. He writes often on Information Clearinghouse. I quote Petras and salute his courage, and I mean that. McChrystal's rise to leadership is marked by his central role in directing special operations teams engaged in extrajudicial assassinations, systematic torture, bombing of civilian communities, and search and destroy missions. He is the very embodiment of the brutality and gore that accompanies military-driven empire building. Between September 2003 and August 2008, McChrystal directed the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Command, which operates special teams in overseas assassinations. I think it's that the El Salvador option is allied to that, and that was Colonel Steele, where they fought, well, we'll leave it alone. The living and the dead return, cum bisset. Expectant army mums and old soldiers with their medals wave the Union flags in happiness and grief. As they lionize the lads who only do their job, that's the thing, I'm only doing my job. No word is heard about darker races mouldering in the East. As patriotic feeling is massaged, visceral, silent racism is fed and murder made banal. God. The human has instinctively worshipped a god, gods for millennia. Interesting, isn't it? I'm not decrying it, it's interesting. The sun god being the most logical, perhaps. The power of religion has been massive, but now it wanes. Just a few figures. Christianity, 2.1 billion, I think about half Catholic, half Protestant. Islam, 1.5 billion. Secular, non-religious, agnostic, atheist, 1.1 billion. Hinduism, 900 million. So non-believers make up 1/6 of the world's population. Religions are powerful motivators for good or bad. Drivers are multiple, but the wish for eternal salvation or the fear of eternal damnation are two of them. Many people like obedience and ritual. These nominally Christian leaders, I mean that Christ would not recognize them as Christian, could stop wars dead. That's out of sync, actually. Did we see Williams? Oh, it's in there, actually. Bit of luck. Rowan Williams. Adherence of one third of the world's population to the commandment, thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself, should make it certain that a war of choice, a war of aggression, should be stopped in its tank traps by these vicars of Christ. Far from it. After mealy-mouthed condemnation, the show goes on. Altars are set up in the Iraqi desert to bless the troops. The cross of St. George is chalked on those tanks with their depleted uranium-sheathed shells inside, and the pseudo-Christian psychopath in Washington says, I can't imitate him, God told me to strike at Al-Qaeda, and I struck them. Then he instructed me to strike at Saddam, which I did. And now I am determined to solve the problem in the Middle East. If you help me, I will act. This was according to another good liar, Mahmoud Abbas, so-called president of the Palestinian people. He's not president, not in law. He's breached it twice, the basic law. The people, the cannon and the voting fodder, without which no wars would be fought or elections won by landslide. It can only get better. Remember the song? On the day after the landslide election of Blair and his cabal, I voted for him. One of my great regrets in life. The only excuse, of course, was that we'd had a dose of grotesque dishonesty from the previous crew. The paramount war criminal to be, with faux sincerity, of wanting his party and government to be whiter than white. They met in Westminster Hall. That's right, they did. During this current catharsis, there has been discussion of the need to have proportional representation to limit big party dominance in government. Both Conservative parties, led by Cameron and Brown, dismiss this and speak of the need for strong government. Rational and even-handed government is not to be embraced. So current perturbations aside, the fodder will probably be given the choice again of Tweedledum, Tweedledee and Tweedle. The media will convince them that there are salient differences, but they will each be neoliberal and in favour of a fascist and expanding European Union. There are weaknesses in the people which render them as lambs, as sheeple, to psychological slaughter. They have even been educated not to think, and seldom are they inspired to higher things. That necessary skepticism is within only a few. The analytical powers are limited, so shallowness is likely. They discern they have no power when the government reneges on its manifesto, as, say, with the Lisbon Treaty, or not dismantling the health service, a whole list of things, stamping its boot on the face of the electorate. Cynicism grows, and only the congenital Tory and Labour person turns up to vote. The turnout was highest in 1950, interestingly, at 84%. And at the last, in 2005, it was 60%. Labour got a majority of 67 seats, with having got 35 of the votes cast in the last election, including, no doubt, many of those Banana Republic postal votes, which you've now forgotten about. Do you remember them? Disgusting. Extraordinary. But a flood tide has swept in and taken a few of those dirty nappies out to a forgiving sea. The Brits have come as close to rebellion as they ever will. Anger has hit the top of the Richter scale. A poll showed 80%, yes, 80% want independent MPs. My heart lifts. They can see the party system only serves the apparatchiks, and that principle in politicians is a rarity. Something has happened that I have spoken for these past 10 years. 100 independent MPs, or more perhaps, of proven worth in their working lives might save our democracy for the demos, the people. The greasy pole-climbing MP might become a rarity. A parliament might vote against British involvement in a preemptive war in Iraq, screamed for by Israel and backed by its surrogate, the USA. It is a surrogate. The media. I thought that Tony Gosling's here was too kind the other day on the BBC. No one here would deny, and I say that respectfully because he's been a journalist, no one here would deny that the broadcast and print media in all states worldwide is central to the incarceration of the minds of almost all citizens. The BBC, or the ZBC as I call it, excels above all other corporations in propaganda. You remember in the lead up to the Iraq War, we were fed Pearl, Wolfowitz, Edelman, endlessly on Newsnight, and anyone like myself who spoke against, or people who could get somewhere in saying it, who spoke against the Iraq War, were only given 2% of broadcasting time on the BBC. It was worse even than the American corporate media. 2%. It was fed night after night. I can remember it actually. It works seamlessly with government in this. I'm sure of this. There's an article on my website. If you Google the website of David Halpin, there's an article, a very short article. I can't remember the title now, but it just describes how an outside broadcast from Blair's house in something field was put in as an extra item, as if it was an urgent item on the Friday night news. And the whole thing had been set up for about 48 hours. It was just pure propaganda. It was when Libya decided to give up their weapons of mass destruction. I don't think it had any. 9 million people. I read that there are 200 ciphers in Downing Street Media Unit, but I cannot find a reference to it. We can be sure, however, that there are the closest connections between the media and government, and a government which prosecutes illegal wars and privatizes valued public services. The BBC, this is very important. The BBC, this is where Orwell knew his stuff. The BBC has linguists in its ranks, and it knows that one well-chosen word alone, I think so much, more water. One well-chosen word alone will be the black diamond of a propaganda piece. Just a fragment from the top of my brain. When the Israeli Air Force were liquidating dozens of graduating police officers in milliseconds, more than had been killed by Qassam rockets in 7 years, just like that, it took place in security compounds, not in a Dixon of Dock Green type police station. Do you get that? Security compound, police station, you see? I've seen the security, yes, ramshackle. I quote from John Pinter via Pilger. Across the world, he pointed out, the extinction and suffering of countless human beings could be attributed to rampant American power. But you wouldn't know it, he said. It never happened. Nothing ever happened. Even while it was happening, it wasn't happening. It didn't matter. It was of no interest. For the BBC, Pinter's speech never happened. Not a word of it was broadcast. It never happened. And John Pilger, who I count to be a friend. The words mistake and blunder are common BBC News currency, along with failure, which at least suggests that if the deliberate, calculated, unprovoked, illegal assault on defenseless Iraq had succeeded, that would have been just fine if it was a mistake. Whenever I hear these words, I remember Edward Herman's marvelous essay about normalizing the unthinkable. For that's what media cliched language does and is designed to do. It normalizes the unthinkable. And I'll show you a few images at the end which make that point. Because they haven't impinged on our British population or world populations. Of the degradation of war, of severed limbs, of maimed children, all of which I've seen. This is Pilger. Again, consider how the power of this invisible government has grown. In 1983, the principal global media was owned by 50 corporations, most of them American. In 2002, this had fallen to just 9 corporations. Today it is probably 5. Rupert Murdoch has predicted that there will be just 3 global media giants, and his company will be one of them. Tom Paine, my hero, warned that if the majority of the people were being denied the truth and ideas of truth, it was time to storm what he called the Bastille of words. That time is now. The broadcast word and image sucks the truth from all. The strategies that drive the burning and the maiming. It is often said the main driver is the military-industrial complex. That doesn't wash with me. Although big money is made, especially with the usual overruns on complex weapons, more money can be made running supermarket chains. Aggressive wars, wars of choice, happen because power is concentrated in the hands of psychopathic males. A grossly abnormal upbringing, I think that's a key thing actually, a lack of maternal love, essentially, which I had in great quantity, I know, is grafted onto the Y chromosome. I think that's this is the nub of it. Beneath them are those who want blood and chaos. A lot of our populations, they love blood. They like chaos, I think, as long as it's someone else doing the suffering. The present wars in the Middle East and Asia are down to the project of the new American century. What's the matter? We'll ignore that. Who was it?
Plug it in.
What? Plug it in. I'll let someone else. I don't want to be distracted. I'll let someone else, perhaps Jamie, might be able to fix it. Jamie very kindly put my images onto PowerPoint. Wasn't me, was it?
What's that?
It's gone off.
No, I'll have a look at it.
But that's fine, Jim. I'll speak on here. It's all right. There's plenty of light. It is often, as I said, the present wars in the Middle East and Asia are down to the project of the new American century and its aims that the USA should be dominant on land, at sea, in the air, space and cyberspace. But to what benefit? What drove the British Empire? The need to dominate, hence dominion, greed for resources and free manpower, religious zeal, improvement of the native peoples, etc. That was a big thing, wasn't it? The British Empire, improving the natives, bringing light to them in their darkness. The USA, through PNAC, would appear to be planning world domination. I'm unhappy in saying this because it seems both irrational and evil. Well, they're evil, what we understand, but it's so irrational. However, it has broken a country with the second biggest oil reserves in the world, shattered it. And its present focus on Afghanistan is all to do with the hydrocarbon reserves in the Caspian Basin and in the country to the west, Iran. But the soldiers won't be told that. And certainly the relatives are the ones who receive the bodies in the coffins won't be told that either. The pretense is defense, but domination is the aim. It could continue trading economically for oil, but the aim is to hold and thus to be able to deny energy to other nations, and that's the key. If they hold the energy resources, then they can keep China, Japan, and other countries in check. I read that Rockefeller and Kissinger, this has been alluded to already in this meeting, have spoken of the need to reduce world population by 2/3. The Schiller Institute for Peace, Farmers and Eaters Unite, I'd imagine a lobby group for farmers, the title of one of their papers is Henry Kissinger's 1974 Plan for Food Control Genocide. That doesn't mince words, does it? But this is the stuff that the media makes certain stays in the dark. This Dr. Strangelove approach, the green orb in the capable hands of the US of A, might be a strong thread in the PNAC. By the way, do you notice how few citizens know of PNAC? Very few. And have you ever heard the media utter it? They never utter PNAC. I never heard it on the media.
What is that?
Well, I make my point. Project of the new American century. If you Google it, you'll get up. Are we going now? No. If you Google it, you'll get hundreds of references. The easiest one to read is by a fellow called Neil Mackay, of the Scottish Herald, of the Sunday Herald in Scotland. It's a good paper, and Neil has sort of praised it very satisfactorily. It's an extraordinary document, and the last two people who updated it and signed it off, so to speak, were our dear friends Wolfowitz and Elliot Abrahams. You can do those names what you will. I just realized I didn't mention in the soldiers bit, although the image came up, of our friend Prince Harry with the Gurkhas. I'll just say that very quickly, it's going to save time. That's very important. They dress the royal family up. They're always in uniform. None of them become doctors or nurses like my wife or something useful and kindly. They're always, in fact, in uniform. And because people are so loyal to the royal family in this country, that loyalty to the royal family is transferred unthinkingly to the services. And that nitwit, Prince Harry, the Captain Wales he's called, has on the back of his cap, did you see it? You'll know, don't you? Did you see it? We do bad things to bad people. And the Sun newspaper went along with it. They loved it. And there is fatalism. This is, I talk about strategies. This is an oblique point. There is fatalism beyond irrational belief. The Christian fundamentalists look forward to the second coming and its attendant Armageddon. But I always say this, but when the Jordan flows with blood, you can bet it will not be theirs. It'll be Arab blood. Their rapture will be unalloyed with pain. They'll be fine sitting in San Francisco, wherever. And Islam has, or Brooklyn more likely, and Islam has a day of judgment. I know that very well, because if I expose my non-belief to my very good my Muslim brothers in Gaza, I'm well aware that I won't be going anywhere but down. So many have a fatalistic belief system, and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy is made more likely. They have a day of judgment too. Did you know that? Islam has it. So sort of, let's come on, I find it. In humility, the possible remedies as I see them. I've been trained as a doctor to get to the root in diagnosis, as well as to weigh the nuances.
You're fading a bit again.
Okay, right. I'll speak up. Getting tired. No, I'll drink water. I cannot stand going to talks and not hearing the speaker. People mumble. So do say it again if you can't hear me. I speak too fast too. I find that even the better educated, and I put educated in inverted commas, shun vision of the depths of profundity. They are pond skaters moving randomly on surface tension. They are perplexed, fearful, lost. They are as susceptible now as the well-educated people of Germany was to these powerful hoses of the mind. I allude to brainwashing, of course. And the reference to look up is a reference by Milton Mayer, who wrote after the war about what the German people were up to before the war. I think he was a German Jew who got out, but he writes extremely well. And this is a very good quotation which shows you exactly what is happening in this country now. Wish I'd have cut it with me. The components of Hitler's rise: the Reichstag fire, imitated by 9/11, 7/7, which was followed by no inquests. I learned a lot about this. No inquiry, and all the anti-Islamic propaganda to drive the war on Islam. God, but no reference to Christ. In Mein Kampf, I'm told, Hitler mentioned God over 500 times. Patriotism. The British are good at this. And if you look at my website again, I've written an article about Blair at the Cenotaph 2 years ago. It's titled, Hypocrisy is in the title somewhere. It's a very good, I think it's a good article. I wrote in anger the day that they broadcast it on the Sunday. Racism, the idea of the other, the Untermenschen, those of lesser or even of no worth. This is conveyed every time the British media reports the identity of a dead soldier and the grieving words of the dear ones. Whereas Afghan civilians, no name, no interview, no funeral, no worth. This is the pabulum, good Latin word, the porridge, the medium on which the powerful seek to incubate the greatest evil. Oh, we've got it back again. Jolly good. There's nothing on the screen here. That's why I was... Ah, yes. I must have skipped a page, actually, because I have actually... after him, I showed our friend the Pope with a war criminal to his left, giving him, in essence, blessing, and he kissed, apparently Bush kissed the Pope's hand, the ring. This is the Pope at Ben Gurion Airport with the Nobel Prize winner plus war criminal in the middle, Perez, and another war criminal on the right, Netanyahu. And what he's doing, it's been a marvelous PR exercise for the Zionist entity because the Pope going there, not going to Gaza, they've forgotten Gaza. Gaza's gone, finished. And he didn't, and there was a lot of nonsense in Aida camp, which I know, near Bethlehem, with the wall. I don't think he was shown against it either. So he's really blessed the regime there. That's God for you. And I know if Christ was here... What? It probably is, actually. But if Christ, I always say this in Gaza, if Christ was here, I really mean it, actually. You know, the nonsense uniforms and the rest of it. Now, well, we're not sure about that. Now, what do we do? I'll just go through this a bit. I'm rather pleased it's come again.
At Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa, another tale of the pain of war. This boy...
Can you hear that? This boy has probably been blinded by phosphorus or phosphorus smoke. I don't know. But anyway, here he is. It's an Al Jazeera clip. But I think of my 3 grandchildren when I see this blinded child. Imagine what it's like for this boy, you know, with his eyes, you know, what it's like when you've got peripheral spasm with the
It's yet another blow to Gaza's medics, already working under terrible conditions. But despite how famous, critically low medical supplies and amount of death toll, the work still goes on. As another victim of the war tells...
The second child, whose right leg was amputated, and she's saying that she wanted to be a doctor. Lovely girl, great equanimity, and she's decided now to be a journalist.
It was a day that was supposed to...
I'm cross about the audiovisual tricks in hospitals when these things are rather younger. Whenever anyone put up a video of veins being injected with dye or something, they never worked. So I always make sure it's all running beforehand. Now, what do? We can turn it off, actually, now. I just want the stills again. The hour is late, very late. First, silence and nihilism, or nihilism, is complicity. We know that. You're here for that reason, you know that. But I don't think our population know it. They feel no guilt. They don't feel guilt about it. Information, find the truth. Adams, liberty can not be preserved without general knowledge among the people. Like 1775, it's on my desk. Then we stand up and we speak out as we are doing here. Direct, non-violent action. There's people like Linda Persis, sister-in-law of a colleague of mine, a good colleague of mine, who disabled a B-52 at Fairford, were right to do that. I couldn't do it, but she did it. The crimes being committed by Bush, Brown and Olmert and others are so great that this is fully justified in morality and law, i.e. the prevention of a greater crime. Our democracy is an illusion. It has failed and it has caused great suffering. We must not excuse it, but renew it. There must be peaceful revolution. Blair spoke in 2006 of an arc of extremism as the bombs were falling on Lebanon and the people were dying in Gaza and the West Bank and by the score in Iraq. The latter of his making, extremism. Yeah. I don't think there's been an era like it for lying. Extraordinary. There is no arc of extremism, which of course took in Syria and Iran. It went like that to Lebanon. There is not an arc, but an axis of extreme evil. At one pole there is Tel Aviv, at the other is Washington, and in the middle is London. Power oscillates backwards and forwards along this axis as busily as all those jets carrying them. This axis has no interest in justice or in true democracy. It cannot warm to the smile of a child or comfort a tear. Can you hear the sobbing of the child, that child who is your child? You've just seen that film at the wrong spot, but you've seen a bit of it. The voice and the English translation would have helped. I just want to show a few more images. I hope they come up.
At Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa, another tale of the pain of war. This boy was caught in an Israeli raid.
Wallah.
There are, while I try and get this working, there are now...
We were told that this...
Jamie, I want the slides after the tiny video, or someone. There are dozens of adults and children blinded, not all from phosphorus, from other things. I know I've written up, there's also an article by me about weapons used in Gaza, but they've also been used in Fallujah. In fact, Fallujah was exactly the same as Gaza, same weapons. What?
What is that?
I'll tell you. Well, let me just get this one. Anyway, some of them have been blinded by tiny fragments, micro shrapnel. About 4 reasons. And also, the thermobaric weapons burst the globe if you're near enough, the pressure wave. That's why they use them to kill people around corners, partly. That's in Abu Ghraib. And don't forget, Abu Ghraib is only one of dozens of these places. But I thought it captured the evil of the empire, which we are joined to. Black gloves with a smile on his damn face. This is the same gentleman with his fist pummeling the back of the neck of one of his Muslim victims, with 4 or 5 others around him in various stages of being trussed up or whatever. Can you see the picture?
Yes.
This is another one, and you may not see it. I wish there wasn't this light on the bottom of the screen, but he's in fact praying. They made him pray in that position. We are the most decadent people if we can degrade people like that. And when I saw Craig Murray speaking his piece about the revolting, terrible torture in Uzbekistan, which we were getting information, of course not information, people in terrorist anything, that used to come to us via the CIA. And Craig knew that. He's exposed it. I see these creeps in the Lords, in the committee, and the House, trying to massage it. And finally, well, this is another one. This is, in fact, in Gaza. This is a baby that's died, and her mummy cradling it. And this is a mother with her dead children. We're all part of this. I don't feel part of it because I'm fighting against it. I'm sure you are as well. We must fight against it. And finally, the paramount war criminal Blair. I've come to him last. It was announced after the Holocaust that was rained on Gaza that he'd been awarded the Dan David Prize for leadership. Small change at $1 million. By Jove, our charity could do with that. The citation included, that quote, "He showed exceptional intelligence and foresight and demonstrated moral courage and leadership." Now, this is important. Do you see that image? I've written a lot about this, and my colleagues from, my friends from Totnes will have seen the image before. Ian will have seen it. This is Ali Abbas. About 10 days after the shock and awe started, he was in his house sleeping with his mum, I think sleeping by his mum actually, Zawania, about 15 miles out of the center of Baghdad. And I think he said he heard 2 noises. But his mother and father were incinerated, and 10 other relatives with them. But he had his arms incinerated and his trunk for a depth of about an inch. I'm quite certain, no one has come to me on this, but I've thought a lot about it. I've examined the way he's been burnt. He had the most intense thermal energy applied to him in a flash, in milliseconds. And the only thing which does that is a nuclear weapon. And there have been bloggers, Iraqis, who've spoken on neutron bombs. I don't know about that. You can't find anything about neutron bombs on Wikipedia. But a tactical nuclear weapon, if it was near enough, could have done this. The thing is that it's an extraordinary, people say, oh, napalm, rubbish, rubbish. You can see that the bones of his hands stand out. Next, he sees us, looking at us, and I always say that he's saying to us, what have you done to me? What have you done to me? What have you, the Western world, with your self-satisfied, with your thinking that you're somehow better than the Arab people, who could teach us lots. Islam could teach us a great deal, as it happens. So there we are. That's Ali Abbas, and he's been to school in this country, made a big fuss of him here, and he's now 18. And that's one victim of Mr. Blair. One victim. And there he is. This is the prime psychopath. He really is very, very bad news. He's now flitting around the world using kerosene. This is in December 9th, with Barbara Stronach, whoever she is, promoting this strange way the words merge. Faith Foundation. Tony Blair, Faith Foundation. And he's talking about, conversations between the faiths. And I think, the worst thing that's ever happened to this country, actually, and to the world, really. Not to the world, I can think of worse, but he's of a type. And what I'm trying to say is Ali Abbas, and there's that smile on his face, does he show any evidence, any trace on his face of what he's done to just one person? None at all. And that's my point. So, almost nearing the end. One of his, I've said that. Now, outrage, I think that's the first thing. There must be outrage at 10 on the Richter scale. We must feel the greatest anger and then convert it into useful action. How you do it is difficult. And all those who've committed the supreme international war crime should be brought to trial. So the Nuremberg principles. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. That's very important, and it's very true, because the torture with that revolting man with the black gloves, and the rape and all the rest of it, and the stealing of the resources is crime. You see, that's forbidden in the Geneva Convention, taking a country's resources, which they've done by various means. So that's the thing. Other one. Now, there they are. That's 1940, cheerful-looking Adolf, and a fairly confident, rather cocky-looking Il Duce. Nothing's changed. The chap on the right there we've been up to exactly the same tricks. He invaded 2 countries under pretext, Czechoslovakia, certainly Poland under a pretext. And we've done exactly the same in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, this business of getting people to the court, I want you to take away with you a link to a very important website, which is not a petition, it's just to join us in trying to get Blair to the dock. I'll tell you just in a minute, actually. Now, I've discovered a lot about this. Marxists do not favor trials. I will speak up louder. Marxists do not favor trials, and lawyers shrug their shoulders about getting this chap, getting Blair to trial. It's very interesting, this. No one wants to know. If it's Vladic or Lubanga from Rwanda, another matter. They go, you see, but not our lot. But the thing is, if you do not arraign these people, try them properly, and if they're found guilty, then imprison them, then nothing changes. And it's an absolute key. This is really the center of my talk. But Marxists don't agree with this, I've discovered, and some other socialist tribes as well. I'm a socialist, but I'm not a tribal socialist. And because you Stop the War coalition, they don't want to know about our attempt to get Blair in the dock. They don't want to know. They don't want to know the Stop the War coalition. I think it's some political, religious belief that you don't. And the key one is Tony Benn. I've had conversations with him, and I've fallen out with him. They are very cunning, actually, but he talks about inquiries. Well, I could discuss this in some depth. I know a lot about inquiries, too, having dealt with the Kelly thing and investigated that. But the Public Inquiry Act they've changed. It's now, in fact, virtually toothless. If you look at the Savile inquiry for the Bloody Sunday, which happened, I think, over 30 years ago, when those 13 unarmed Republicans were shot down, were gunned down by the paratroops, that was held, millions, dozens of QCs. If you look at the Google, the website for Savile inquiry, the last entry was 4 years ago, just tails off. That's the Savile inquiry. What would it be like for the Iraq inquiry? Can you imagine it? You hear all these ruddy liberals going around our country talking about inquiries. It's a lovely good way of kicking it into the long grass. Do you see what I mean? It is absolutely key. If that previous image doesn't have this, then other people are in trouble. Now, I'll just show a few more images. I'm going to shut up. The reference, if you just Google Blair War Crimes Foundation, read what we have to say on it. It was Nicholas Wood who set it up. Blair War Crimes Foundation. I would love you all to go away with that, look at it. If you agree with us, and I'm sure you will, put your name on it, on the list of signatures. It's not a petition, in essence, but we do intend to go to the UN. We'll leave it anyway, what should happen. Now, before let's show a few of these images. We stop the killing by bringing war criminals to the bar of the World Court. We can discuss which World Court, and that's one of the things that they immediately tell you about, is the ICC wouldn't deal with Blair. Interesting, isn't it, that? They say they wouldn't touch him, or the Americans. Otherwise, we're all complicit in the deaths, the maiming, and the torture, both past and in the future. And that's the actual website of that. But if you Google it, it's enough. This is my diagnosis. What we see before us is evil beyond all words. And the cure, if you think about it, comes down to two words: truth and love. Have I got time to speak of dignity? What? Well, I'll be very brief. I didn't want to put it together, but you know this Shur, as I call it, and it's properly called Shur, it means mass killing of human beings. It started on the 27th of December, just 2 days after the day we celebrate the birth of Christ. And I've been to Gaza 9 times already, often in difficulty, and almost always they've been killing them. I mean the people in Gaza. And when it started, I felt I should be there, partly to represent my charity, the Dove and Dolphin, or our charity, as chairman, and partly to offer myself, if it might be useful, as a surgeon, and thirdly, just to be with my sisters and brothers in their further torment. So I got a flight from Heathrow to Larnaca, and I got to the boat, the Dignity, which was being funded and run by a wonderful lot of people called Free Gaza. I got there an hour before they slipped the moorings. And we gunned off into the Mediterranean in the night and into a stiffening sea, so I was quite quickly seasick, as were some others. There was one surgeon with me, the lovely lady surgeon from Cyprus. a Palestinian doctor I knew already as it happened, Sami al-Haj, great big Sudanese man from Al Jazeera, who'd been in Guantanamo for 5 years for being a Muslim and a member of the Al Jazeera team. There was an Al Jazeera team, 2 chaps, Cameron's thing, a nice chap, European, from CNN, a good captain and mate, a few others, some very good people actually, and most of all, I remember Cynthia McKinney, a wonderful ex-congressman who stood for the Green Party for presidency at this time. And she speaks clearly about the Palestinians. She speaks with absolute courage about Zionism. And for that reason, they've tried every trick in the book in America to silence her or to endanger her. But she was with me across the saloon. Anyway, that was, we set off about 7 o'clock. I was vomiting for the next 8. And then at 5 o'clock in the morning, when it was still dark, searchlights came up astern. I knew what they were because I'd seen these damnable gunboats, which are very powerful, very, very sharp prows. They can cream along at 50 knots. They have all the weapons, everything. And they shoot the fishermen, and they shoot the people on the shore, and generally oppress these people. And I saw the searchlights, and they came abreast and went ahead and fell back over this time. The sea was pretty, it was about an 10-foot sea, pretty stiff wind. And I saw tracer go up in ellipses, and I saw flares go up, not at us. And then, after about half an hour, it seemed to go quiet, I thought, for a bit. And suddenly, there was a hell of a crash on the bow, and another crash, and a third crash on the port beam opposite where I was sitting. I felt the boat pinch like that. The bow dipped with the first crash, and the master said, "We've been rammed." We deployed life vests because we thought we were going to drown. The boat would go down. I thought the boat was breaking up. And Cynthia said, "I can't swim, David." I said, "Well, I'll stay with you, Cynthia." That would have been useless, actually. I had a puffer jacket on. Useless. Useless. And it was unpleasant. There were unpleasant conditions. 53 miles off the Israeli coast. And anyway, at that point, there was then a conversation started on the radio with our master from one of the Israeli gunboat captains. And he said, "First of all, you are terrorists." We had 3 tons of medical supplies on board from the Cypriot government. Then he said we were subversives, I think. And the third thing, he said, you were going to shoot us. Anyway, he directed that we should not go to Gaza, which was our aim, or to El Arish in Egypt, but to make back for Larnaca. Well, you can see the gash in the boat, can't you? So here's a seat. This is meant to be a captain in a navy of a democratic nation. First of all, ramming us. If he had rammed a glass-reinforced plastic hull, it would have shattered. We'd have scooped water. We had 2 stocking-grade Detroit diesel engines, 840 horsepower down below. We'd have sunk like a stone. People would have been drowned quite quickly. Those who had survived would have been run down, I think. I have no doubt that this was a lethal. It was with lethal intent. There was no word before this. But it was a marine ply boat with wooden ribs. But to go back to Larnaca, you can see with this hull, we were taking water, but not too much. We couldn't judge it because bilge pumps were already going. And we made it to Lebanon. We met all the high command. It was interesting. But I, for the next month, wept as I saw what torment was being poured on the people I knew well in Gaza. And I'd been prevented in a simple humanitarian aim from going where I wanted to go with 15 other people. It is beyond all law, beyond all humanity, and our Foreign Office couldn't care a tinker's cuss. And why? Because they are hand in glove with the Zionists. Miliband runs it. You know, he's Ashkenazi Jew. I have to say it. You know, they represent about 2% of our population. Why are, and we'll leave it at that. Quite extraordinary what's going on.
Is my mic on? I just wanted to point out, David is modest, and I don't know if you actually understand, but this man spent £100,000 of his own money to start up the charity Dove and Dolphin. And essentially, he doesn't just send medical supplies, he takes them there himself to make sure they get to the right people. And we are just asking that on the way out there are going to be buckets on the doors and also a bucket in reception for the rest of the day. Any money you give will go through David directly to the people who really need it. David. Thank you.